In the Western world, routinely frequented by government technocrats to, among others, benchmark best practices, construction is determined by an established planning code, design standards, and building regulations to give cities a pristine image. But for a number of reasons, all efforts to remodel Kampala, a city originally planned for 150,000 people but is today teeming with a daytime population nearing 5 million, are failing, with the city choking on poor infrastructure and a swell of condemned buildings. And with a freewheeling construction industry fueled by, among others, the syndicated public corruption, contributing over 13% of GDP, proper urban planning has been pushed to the back burners and is now determined by demand and supply. Peppered with weak enforcement of laws and regulations, impunity and corruption are the jet fuel of this messy, rapid urbanization, which is a ticking time bomb. The storied building under construction that collapsed in Chisenyi in Mengo on September 5th was the second of such incidents to happen this year. The accident killed 8 people and injured a dozen others. The first building accident happened barely a month earlier on August 15th in Chitebi, NTV, which killed 1 person and injured 2 others. The third accident happened early last month in Barra, where a 3-storied building belonging to a decorated UPDF officer collapsed. The common thread in the 3 accidents is impunity, weak regulation, and poor construction materials and methods, according to a probe report seen by NTV. According to a 2021 report by Kyambogo University's Department of Civil and Building Engineering, the major causes of building accidents are weak foundations, substandard constructional materials, poor material mixing by construction workers, and excessive load on strength of buildings. This is reinforced by several investigations reports of collapsed buildings around the country over the past years. The building in Jinja on January 15, 2020, that killed at least 4 people and injured 9, according to the Architects Registration Board, was as a result of, among others, inferior materials. All the while, the report notes that municipal engineers were going to the site as mandated, but rather stayed in their cars instead of getting to the site to supervise and inspect the works.
We need the local governments to step up. We need to step up their game. There is a law in this country that requires every single local government to employ an architect. As I speak today now here, if I'm not mistaken, only Kampala has an architect among its staff. All the others, none of them has an architect among its staff. There's a law, the Building Control Act 2013, that requires them to have an architect among the staff. They're there, we have the architects registered, none of them has an architect among their staff. And the reason the law says this is because they know that if an architect sits on the committee that's approving the building plans, he will be able to tell a few things. No, the developer can't do this because it will lead to this. The developer can't do this because it will lead this.
Major issue, actually, generally speaking, it is flouting of the legal framework. Because the legal framework is clear, you need permission in order to commence a building. Most of these buildings do not have permission to start construction. They don't have drawings, they do not have qualified professionals doing the designs or even doing supervision. You find unqualified people on site, and because of the unqualified people on site, the quality of material itself is poor.
The regulation helps you to understand the risk that you are putting yourself in. You can end up losing the money if you don't build the building as approved. Because the approval looks at a number of things. The approval looks at the foundation or the ground on which you are putting a building. That ground can only withstand a certain load. So they come to check. We approved 2 stories, for instance, because we checked that that ground can withstand that weight of 2 stories. Now, because you got more money or because you got some other business venture, you want to change them to 4 For you may not know the risk. What is in your mind is the fact that you want more space and you want more business.
According to the Chisenyi Building Accident Probe reports by both the National Building Review Board and the Architects Registration Board, evidence has emerged that there were enough warning signs. KCCA had halted construction at the site on July 30, 2021, but the developer did not take heed of these orders. The reports recommended criminal prosecution of the developer, Haruna Sentongo, but 2 months later, authorities at City Hall have conspicuously gone silent. One building inspector, speaking anonymously, told NTV about the unusual presence of Special Forces Command, SFC, the semi-independent unit of the UPDF, at the ill-fated site in Chisenyi immediately after its collapse. No one knows why they were there. The unit spokesperson, Major Jimmy Omara, was not readily available for comment, but the building inspector said it was not entirely surprising. The chairperson of the Architects Registration Board, Robert Chigundu, reinforced the same, citing other instances when inspectors from his body have visited construction sites around Kampala for impromptu spot checks, only for guns to be drawn at them and being told to leave.
The building inspector from the Architects Registration Board, I'm here to look at the site and confirm that everything is well, that you've got qualified supervisors, that you're mixing everything well. Rather than answering, him that we'll let you in or not, a gun is drawn on him. Get away from here. If you don't get out, I'll shoot you. Is that kind of situation you want to live in? Of course, what I've told the staff is that you can't endanger yourself. If someone asks you to leave the site, even if we want to make things done correctly, you leave.
There are claims that some of the construction sites are owned by the ruling class elite who use businessmen as proxies if the corporate veil was lifted. As such, they violate most building codes and regulations. Chigundu says this state of affairs is worrying.
Even you, by the way, the law says even you as a private citizen, for those things you can actually protest. Because this is public space that the private developer is encroaching on. But there's nothing that can happen. I've personally picked up the phone and called people and they said, look, this is happening on site X and I don't think it should happen. The law does not allow you to dump materials in a road where you're building. The law does not allow you to construct beyond 6 p.m. unless you've got a special permit. In my neighborhood, people sometimes construct beyond 6 p.m. and when it gets to, out of hand, midnight, 1 o'clock, I call the police and I say, but someone here is constructing and I read the law for them. That neighbor of yours is stubborn. And it just ends there. You see? So for me, I don't know, but there must be concerted effort from all of us.
Across Kampala's skyline, there is a long list of buildings constructed either in gazetted areas such as road reserves, drainage spots, or in previously public land or spaces. Along Kafu Road, one such high-rise building is currently under construction. It's a mess after a heavy downpour. In 2011, KCCA condemned 13 buildings around Kampala, among others Royal Complex, Yamaha Center, and JBK Building, for violating approved building plans and regulations, from converting approved parking space into shops, absence of fire escape, and firefighting provisions, but the buildings were neither raised nor remodeled. In 2019, the Uganda National Roads Authority attempted to raise all structures built within gazetted road reserves along all major highways. The operation failed spectacularly in trial phase along the old NTV road when the Roads Authority attempted to bring down structures linked to powerful individuals who are deemed as sacred cows.
We must come together as a country, sit down and refocus ourselves and say we need to do these things. So going back to your question, when you sit, what do you do about this? We are first of all recognize that the problems are there and we have solutions. But our solutions stop somewhere.
Building regulations and a host of laws and regulations provide means through which local authorities can control the use of buildings, available land resources and infrastructure amenities to guarantee proper spatial organization. But this seems a far cry in Uganda's case. Until 2010, the weakness and shoddy planning was attributed to the Colonial Town and Country Planning Act 1951, which was repealed by the National Physical Planning Act, amended in 2020. The new act degazetted the entire country as a planning area, wherein one cannot carry out any development without obtaining requisite authorization from the Physical Planning Committee of any local authority. But this is not the case. In 2013, the National Control Act established the National Building Review Board, or NBRB, to enforce building standards nationwide. But the National Building Review Board's Executive Secretary, Flavia Bwire, says that they have an uphill task.
The law says you must do ABCD and you don't do it with impunity, you just decide to construct. So the developers are mostly to blame. Although we will not exonerate those offices that are supposed to monitor and ensure that these developers are actually complying with the law.
National Building Review Board survey last month detailed that 88% of the buildings in the 11 cities do not comply with the Building Control Act, putting lives of users at risk. The Building Control Act 2013 and its attendant, National Building Code 2019, and the Building Control Regulations 2020 stipulate general offences and penalties for a person who fails to comply with the terms of a notice or conditions issued under these regulations. But no one has been brought to book yet.
Any person whose negligence, commission or omission causes or leads to the occurrence of an accident on a building construction site, which results in the injury or death of another person or the destruction of property, commits an offense, and is liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding 288 currency points or to imprisonment not exceeding 12 years.
Also, another caliber of developers who totally ignore the entire system. And to be fair to KCCA, which I work with most of the time, that is happening. But again, you'll ask, how come sometimes KCCA says that we stopped builder X or developer X not to continue with the development because there were no approved plans, but he or she continued? It is because KCCA can only touch some people and can't touch the others.
A 2015 Auditor General's report details that the weak regulatory framework in the construction sector is one of the fundamental weaknesses in the construction industry, demanding immediate attention. The report noted that a combination of laws do not empower institutions to act, and a narrow scope of mandate have rendered them even weaker. Isaac Mutenyo, the chairperson of the Engineers Registration Board, the statutory body that streamlines engineers, says enforcement remains a lingering challenge.
And the example, what you've been talking about is in the road. If the person who is in charge of traffic control is the one breaking the traffic rules, why would anybody else follow them? Okay? So it starts with those who are in charge to be exemplary to the others. Okay? But I think also the education, the people must learn. You know, like I've said, many times when a person, an authority, when it tells you, you better stop doing what you're doing, it is mostly to safeguard you. People need to listen. There are so many cases where people don't listen. You tell them, oh, you better stop, you know, the way you're constructing there, you better stop, because when it rains, you're going to have a flood, and they refuse.
Mutenyo said concentration is on buildings, while the rest of the other key aspects remain unattended to.
The beginning of any construction, even for your own building, a small building you're building somewhere, the first point should be, this is the physical plan of that area. Let me give an example. For instance, if you want to build a house in Chireka, the first thing as a developer you must be shown, you see this? This is the physical plan. In your area where you want to build your house, the road which is going there cannot take there a truck. That's what should be done. But now the area plan is not referred to at all. People just build, and you know, that is why you see so many beautiful houses. I think you see them in Chira. Beautiful, nicely made, but arriving in the home is a tug of war. Drainage from the home is a tug of war. It's because of that. So I think while we are concentrating too much on the building itself, I think we need to concentrate a lot more on the area plan.
Some experts have blamed the recurrent accidents on shortage of professionals. For instance, according to the Engineers Registration Board, the country has about 1,400 certified engineers, and a majority, which stands at about 1,000, are employed by government, leaving about 500 in private practice. The void has been filled by quacks. The number of certified architects is even lesser.
I did interact with them.